This is the latest in our series of oral histories. I'm Bill Case. Today's date is December the 5th, 2012, and we are privileged to have with us Larry Schaffer, who is going to be our interviewee today. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you, Bill.
Nice to have you here. We're sitting here at your business office of Townhomes Management at 407 East Livingston.
Right.
And before we get into your history, tell us a little bit about this building.
Well, this building was built in three parts. The oldest part, as far as what we could tell, was 1803. And that's this area that we're sitting in now. And we got that information by that was the year the city of Columbus installed water meters here. So we knew there was housing going on at this particular location.
We've for a couple of years now been debating what's the oldest house in German Village, and maybe this is a candidate for that.
It may be. In 1958, we added on the addition. You can see where there's a step down there at the head of the stairs. The area going back, there was an addition to this small building, and the building was built according to the obligations of the German Village Code.
Larry, I understand you're 82 years old?
83 last week. Right.
83 last week. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And you've spent your life, most of your professional life, in one form or another in the real estate business.
Yes, that's right.
And I want to kind of take you through some of your early life, how you arrived there. So let's talk about your early life here in Columbus. From what we talked about before, you grew up on the South End.
South Side. I grew up, my family had a home on Berkeley Road. They had just built a new house in the same month I was born. I went to Fairwood Elementary School, Roosevelt Junior High School, South High School, and then graduated from Ohio State University.
And I think you said Berkeley Road is kind of around the driving park area, a little bit east of you.
Right. The reason it's called the driving park, if you go there, there's a circle south of Livingston where Eddie Rickenbacker and his friends used to race cars. And then when that was torn down to build housing in that area, but they kept the centerpiece as a park to remind the people that that was where the original driving park was.
Tell us what business your father was in.
My father ran a company called Reliable Laundry, located on South Washington, just south of Livingston Avenue.
And off camera, I think you told us that's just about where I-70 comes through now.
That's right, it is, right.
So that building and the area around it was taken out.
It's all gone, right.
Tell me a little bit about that business, how it operated.
The laundry business?
Yes. You
Well,
told
then-
me about the home delivery. And
When
that
I
stuff.
came home from the service in '55, excuse me, I'm jumping ahead of myself. When I was still in high school, my father bought his interest from a cousin in the Reliable Laundry. And laundries in those days, they called it wet wash laundry. People would give him a bag full of clothing, linens, and so forth. Driver would take it to the main plant. They would wash it and dry it. No, they didn't dry it. They kept it damp, returned it to the household, and the lady of the house ironed all the clothing and put it back to use.
And the lady of the house might just leave the wash to be taken care of right out on the front stoop to be picked up.
That could be. Nobody was afraid of that, as well as the milkman leaving the milk on the front step.
Sure.
And the things that we mentioned before in high school, I worked after school for a few hours every day for my dad for 25 cents an hour, which when they raised it from 15 cents an hour to 25 cents an hour minimum wage, I told my dad he had to pay me more money.
What did he say to that?
He said, we have to comply with the law. So I got 25 cents an hour. Then I went to Ohio State. I lived at home my first year on campus. I lived my next 2 years on campus at the Hillel Foundation on East 16th Avenue.
Tell us about the Hillel Foundation.
Hillel was a community center for Jewish students on campus, a place for them to gather and so forth. And during the course of my being involved with it, we have built 3 buildings all on the same site, each one bigger and better, and we're in the 3rd building now. I had the advantage of being the president of my fraternity at that point and student president of the Hillel Foundation, and I worked on the building committee. In the 2nd and 3rd building, I was chairman of not only the building committee, but the fundraising committee.
So your involvement with the Hillel Foundation was kind of your first little glimpse into the real estate business, it sounds like.
Well, when concurrently, right? At that point, I think at least the 2nd and 3rd building, I had already made my first $1 million sale
Right.
to Humble
That came
Oil,
out.
and I had the luxury of being able to do things that were not necessarily profit-oriented.
I believe you told me that you were slated to be in school from 1947 to 1951 at Ohio State, but something happened to kind of extend that. Tell us about that.
My friend Harry Truman sent me a little letter and say, "Hi Larry, hope you're doing well. This is your invitation to join my Army pier at Fort Hayes for examination on such and such a day." At that point I was a senior, supposed to graduate in May, and the draft board had a ruling. If you had gotten your notice of what's the word? Induction, you no longer could sign up for advanced ROTC. The advantage in being ROTC was you went in as a 2nd lieutenant rather than a plain soldier. So in May, they changed the rules and said if you wanted to, you could still sign up. I was the first guy at Ohio State who signed up for advanced ROTC that year, spread it out over a 2-year period, graduated in 1953, got my lieutenant bars, got called up to the Air Force 3 or 4 months later, went to Germany for a year and a half, had a terrific job in Germany, decided to come back to Columbus and settle down here.
And I think you said that it was a desk job, but it sounds like it was a very important one of deciding air targets, that sort of thing. So it was very militarily oriented.
It was a high-level job. One of the things I could not do was take paperwork home on the weekends or in the evenings. Plus, I did have the advantage. Uncle Sam shipped my car over, so between some friends that I met in service and 2 or 3 fraternity brothers who were drafted and came to Germany, I was able to go to 21 or 22 countries before I came back home.
Sounds like you were making pretty good deals even before you got into the real estate business.
Yes, I was doing okay. In fact, they came to me and said, we have a space for you to go back to Ohio in September or August of 1953. I said, no, I can't go back. I've got a trip to Egypt and Israel for Memorial Day, for Labor Day weekend. The guy said, I never had anybody turn me down for going home early. I said, well, I want to see what I can see. And I got my last couple trips in, drove my car back up to Bremerhaven. Uncle Sam shipped it home, waiting for me in Newark. and I was removed from active duty, retired from active duty at that point.
So here you are in about 1953. I understand your father sold his business and moved to Florida, and here you are trying to decide what to do with the rest of your life.
Right.
And you decided you didn't want to go to Florida.
That's right.
Where did you go?
Decided I also did not want to go into the insurance business. One of my alumni from my fraternity offered me a part ownership in his insurance company when he died. And I said one of the things I realized in the service, insurance was one of the things I did not want to do, because you not only have to sell the prospect on your particular company and policy, no, you have to sell the prospect on the fact that they need insurance. And if they finally agree with you, then you have to sell them a second time on their particular kind of company insurance. So I said, I don't want to get into that. And I had this opportunity to go to work for a brand new real estate brokerage company, whereas in real estate, your buyer wants to buy and your seller wants to sell.
A little easier to facilitate.
That's right. It's easy. And plus, I had the advantage of brokers having just started their firm. I was their first salesman. They saw to it that I got enough business to keep me happy in the real estate business while I built up my own.
I think you said a friend of your brother's started the business.
A brother of a friend of mine.
Okay.
The friend of mine was the guy who told me when we were having that breakfast that his partner wants to sell his service station chain. And I knew his partner too. I just didn't know that he was selling out his business. So I went to see him. He gave me all the information. That's when I contacted Standard Oil of New Jersey, and they bought the business as a side. I said it before, $1.25 million sale. The sale price was actually $1 million.
This was a huge deal for you. At that
Very
time.
huge.
And you knew nothing about how to market a real gas station. I think you told me you just sent a letter to Standard Oil, New Jersey. You didn't even know who to talk to.
That's right. That's right. But I was luckily at the time that the guy that I went to see, that I went to school with, said I'd love to buy them, but my company won't let me have more locations in Columbus. So anyhow, well, I made the contract for the Sunflash stations, and the contract was written by the smart legal brands that the sale had to be approved by the IRS to rule that it was a non-taxable transaction. My client sold his stock in Sunflash to Standard Oil of New Jersey, and it was an approved transaction through the Treasury Department, saying that there was no tax consequences of that. But in the year that it took between the time my prospect filed for that IRS approval and it came through, his stock went up $25,000. So it was $1,025,000 sale rather than $1 million sale.
And you told me about, it was kind of a big deal, your small office, all these big executives from the Standard Oil came in and they said, show us the locations.
Right, and in 24 hours, they decided they wanted to buy the company.
And so, based on this one transaction, I think you said all of a sudden you kind of become the local expert on sales of service stations.
Right, and or commercial property. We did a couple, like, I forget the name of the, anyhow, it was
You did some seminars and stuff, right?
Yeah, people.
You spoke on it.
People that we had talked to about selling or buying property for service station came back and said it doesn't meet our criteria. So by that time I had one salesman. I said, go call on when the Kentucky Fried Chicken,
Right.
the Wendy's, the other people who are paying good prices for good locations. And Wendy's bought the one.
I think one thing I find interesting as we talked about your real estate career, you didn't just stay in one niche. You moved from there into something totally different, vandalized houses.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Well, during the period of time that I was concentrating in the real estate activities, and of course the $1 million deals didn't come along every day. My partner, who was in the commercial construction business, and I sat down and said, what can we do to make some money and also do something good for the city? And we decided that we would go and buy these abandoned houses, and we would restore them and resell them to low-income families under special housing subsidy that we were able to get from HUD. All the houses that we did in the inner city, regardless of what the price was, were sold to the buyer for $500 down. If they could come up with $500 down, they could become the owner of the property, and like Buckeye Federal financed the rest with HUD insurance and so forth.
It doesn't sound dissimilar how John Galbraith started his career. Didn't he take small
Properties and
properties that were in bad shape, fix them up and sell them to veterans coming back from the war?
yes, I think he did do that.
Yeah.
He was just 20 years ahead of me,
Right.
maybe 30 years ahead.
Now, I think you told me that although you were fixing up these abandoned and vandalized houses, these weren't in German Village.
No, they
at
were
first.
not at first, and we were doing these, and we were doing 6 or 8 a year. And finally, at one time, we said, look, we could be doing the same thing German Village has started. There are a lot of properties there that need to be restored. People are going in and spending money on restoring the properties. We decided that that's what we were going to do. We got out, and of course, FHA, who was insuring the mortgages, liked those new buildings much better than old buildings in the inner city.
Particularly at that time.
And I can show you a couple places where the property was empty and vandalized, and we bought it. And before we started building, we went to FHA to get their approval, and the chief architect said, no, we won't insure that property. The neighbor, that was on Bryden Road.
Right.
That property, we don't do anything in those neighborhoods.
And I think from what you told me, you got a little frustrated with that, so you went into the things that they would approve, the government was sponsoring, which was kind of the prefab
Right.
type housing.
Right, right. But vignette to getting that HUD FHA insurance, when we got turned down on this lovely brick house on Bryden Road that needed to be restored, we went with my board member from National Gypsum to the local HUD director and said, this is a program that's going to help the city. There were people who were doing 1 or 2 at a time, but we had, with National Gypsum's backing, we had money to do more than that. And the director said, that's a great program. I think we ought to be in it. I think I want you to do a couple to show what you can do, and I'll guarantee you we'll give you the HUD subsidy. The chief architect said, I won't sign off on that. That's not the right neighborhood and so forth. And the director said, here's the paper, you'll sign it, you'll write on there that I ordered you to sign it, and Larry's gonna go ahead and do these houses. And we did it, and everybody liked it. Another vignette, one of the properties we tried to buy is a Cambridge Arms apartment on East Broad Street. I don't know if you're familiar with that. High-rise, yellow brick at like Monroe or one or two blocks east of Parsons,
Okay.
on the north side of the street. This same guy at HUD said, no, the property is too deteriorated. We will not insure a mortgage on the property. No matter what you're willing to spend, it structurally is not safe. So we decided we had other fish to fry. That gentleman retired from HUD a year or two later, retired, went to work for John Sandiford, who was our only competitor. John Sandiford came back with new specifications, and HUD approved it. And that man,
Not coincidental.
yeah, coincidental, right? But anyhow, we were doing everything we could, and we made HUD look good. A couple places, Cleveland asked us to come take a look at it. Our partners, National Gypsum, were headquartered at Michigan, where Whirlpool washers and dryers were made, and they asked us to come and talk with their local people how they could run the same kind of program in their hometown. And we went to St. Louis, where they offered to give us any of the high-rise houses owned by the housing authority for $1 a piece if we would buy them. And we looked into it, and we got the word from the local unions. You come into St. Louis and use non-union labor, you'll find rubbish the next morning. And we didn't believe him. And another fraternity brother, Jack Wallach, who built some apartments in one of the small towns near Columbus with non-union labor, they blew him up too. So it's been interesting.
Yes. Well, from what I understand, there came a point in time with all this background in rehabbing houses that you went to one of the very early house and garden tours.
1962.
And this apparently made a great impression on you.
Yes, it did. And I decided that that's where I want to live. Took me 2 years to find a house that met my specifications. But that's the 745 South Fifth Street.
And you moved in there.
I moved in after
And you-
complete restoration. One of the things we did, because it was a 1.5 story with the bedroom on the second floor, we tore out the plaster inside on the main floor, and we put a metal spiral staircase going upstairs and put a bath upstairs. Nobody else had done that. German village rules were you could do anything you wanted inside the property. You had to meet the requirements outside the property. So during probably the next 6 months after I moved in and we had that stair, everyone, including this Roger, whatever his name was, who was on the commission and followed me as chairman, came and knocked on my door one night and said, my wife and I were at the Claremont with some friends, and I was telling them what wonderful things you did with your house on South Fifth Street and your circular stairhouse. I wonder if you'd mind if I brought them down and let them look at it. I said, no, if you let me put a pair of pants on, I'll be glad to do it. They came and they enjoyed it. And after that, Barry Zacks, who owned the Max and Irma's, did it with his apartments. And I think there were 1 or 2 other people who used that spiral staircase.
Did you have to go to the commission to get that approved?
No, because it was interior.
Okay.
I told them my plans, but I did not need to get their permission.
So your own house was the first restoration, and you told me how it was that you actually became a member of the commission. Tell us about that.
Well, the politics changed in Columbus from a Republican administration that was Frank Fitch and Bill Schur's friends to a Democratic administration, and my brother-in-law went to work for Dick Sensenbrenner as assistant to the mayor. And one day, as they're getting people scheduled for various appointments, Dick Sensenbrenner said to my brother-in-law, "You know anybody living in German Village? We've got 2 appointments that the mayor has that he can appoint to the commission." He said, "Would Larry be interested?" And my brother-in-law said, "Yeah," and they appointed me to the commission. I served 1 year as a commission member, plain member, and then the second and third years I was chairman of the German Village Commission. At that time, the society and the commission did not exactly work together very closely.
Why was that, do you think?
Because it's my own opinion, the people on the society were used to working in the village, not having anybody tell them what to do. Frank Fitch running around, knocking on doors and telling little old ladies that they're going to have to move, that kind of stuff, and thinking they're still running it. He had a seat on the commission, and he came to it, but as his term expired and as Bill Scherer's term expired, they both were replaced on the commission, and we were able to get things done more freely. They didn't like us, and we didn't like them.
Larry, you told me a little bit about at your time in the commission, I think we're in the mid-60s, pretty much.
Yes, right.
That some of the issues that were prevalent at the time relative to kind of a philosophy of what you would approve. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the idea was to make the exteriors, or keep the exteriors, as much like what they would have been in the late 1800s to early 1900s. So that meant that the owner who's getting ready to restore the outside of a house had to come to the commission and tell us what they wanted to do. That's why we had an architect member of our commission.
But at
appointed by the mayor.
times, there
There
was
was
a little bit
conflict.
of some other considerations that came in. You told me about the stables at Schmidt's, that
Right.
maybe that philosophy was not followed in that case.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Well, our philosophy was let's do whatever we can to get restoration moving along and successful. In the early years, there were people who were willing to spend the money, but they were afraid they'd spend their money and the raggedy houses down the street would continue to deteriorate. So we tried to do everything we where people came in and said, "I want to do restoration to the property, and will you work with us?" And there were cases where within the commission we sort of stretched the rules as to what we thought was proper to do. You remind me of the stables. That was one of the things that was completely outside of the restoration area, a building that had been used for many years as a stable and then as a truck garage, and people were willing to tear it down and build condos there, which are still there at Costas and Jaeger. And we felt that the improvement was so far ahead for the village to get that restaurant in there that we would stretch the rules. Now, 4 or 5 years later, our man from the city attorney's office said to us, "You know, we really shouldn't have done that." But he said, "I kept my mouth shut because it was so important to keep the restoration going." And that's what we felt. And the converse of it, with it, your wife heard me tell the commission, somebody said something about painting trim pink. I told them that one of the things we had right after I went off the commission, a gentleman on City Park came in and said what he wanted to do with this house, and he didn't want to do much. And they felt he didn't meet the minimum requirements, and he got so angry. He went home and he had a painter paint the entire exterior of an all brick house pink, bright pink. And we ended up, legally telling him he had to get it sandblasted and cleaned or sell it to somebody who would. And he sold it to some contractor who restored it and fixed it up. And the other case I told you about that I could remember, the having changes of people on the commission, the city attorney representative somehow got his orders mixed up, and the chairman of the commission got a phone call saying the police are down here on Mohawk, and they just arrested this little old lady for putting up a chain link fence around her house without the permission of German Village Commission. And they took her downtown and booked her, and everybody went crazy. Not only those connected with the program, but those who had lived in Sherman Village and said, I've lived here for 40 years, and you're telling me what I can and can't do with my house. So, but they worked out to get her dismissed, and so.
But that probably did send a message to people that you gotta listen to what we have to say.
Right.
Even though you took some flack for it at
Right.
the time. So, those were interesting times as on the commission, but you didn't just stop with the development of the house you were living in. You ended up rehabbing lots of homes.
There are 39 units that I could remember. I missed the 40th one.
I'm gonna list these only because it might be interesting to somebody who hears this, who knows
Okay.
years from now, knowing that you rehabbed their house. 328 East Beck, 329 Berger, 407 Livingston, where we are now.
Right.
411 Livingston, 413 Livingston, 415 Livingston, 555 Lathrop, 664 Mohawk, which was a 3-unit building, 762 Mohawk, 10 units, 744 to 46 Macon, 3 units on Casa,
Excuse me a minute. What?
Sorry, wrong one.
Okay.
3 units on Casa, 160 Thurman, is that where you live now?
Yes.
218 to 213 Whittier.
And 230. 218 to 230.
So these are multi-units.
Yes.
And 499 Columbus. Tell us a little bit about the multi-unit units that you restored.
Okay, there aren't as many of them because most of the properties in Sherman Village were either single-family houses with live-in owners, or in some cases, 2 families. We bought the ones there that are still standing. We don't own them anymore. That 213 must have been, I got the wrong number, because they had to both be either even number or odd number. That's corner of Whittier and South 6th Street, row. That's still there. The Frankfurt Garden was a project that somebody had worked on and couldn't finish it. Had two families facing Mohawk, townhomes unit facing Mohawk, and a 6th family facing Macon in the back, to show you how interesting the village was at that time. The 6th family in the back and 2 of the 4 units in the front were all occupied by members of the same family, and the rent was $40 a month. And when we bought it, before we had to tell them to move, and one of the gentlemen said, I've lived here for 25 years. I've paid for this house for you. And I said, I understand and I sympathize, but it's a new owner and it's going into a restoration program. So we restored that. Those were the 2 largest. 664 Mohawk was a rooming house with a brick front and a trash area behind it, and we tore, not trash area, but storage area. We tore out the storage area and put in a brand new unit there, and remodeled the unit facing Mohawk, so we ended up with 4 restored units there.
One thing that I found interesting in our discussions today, and something I think folks may kind of lose sight of, was that as German Village was being redeveloped in the 60s, there was a little competition going on amongst some folks in the real estate business, yourself being one, and Frank Fitch, and I think you mentioned another gentleman by the name of Jim Hill.
Right.
Tell us about that competition.
Well, it was all from friendly competition. Jim Hill was one of my bankers, and what he worked out, he had time and liked the idea, so he went out and actually bought vacant. He went around to his friends in the home loan business, small savings and loans, big ones, Buckeye Federal, and said, if you foreclose on properties that you want to get rid of, call me. If they're in the German Village area, I'll buy them. And he'd buy vacant units that had sat empty for a year or two while they went through foreclosure for $2,000 or something like that. And he bought everything he could find, and he restored them one at a time, mainly using his high school sons as spot labor. But there were other people who were restoring and selling their units just as a straight business basis. I'm trying to remember. There was one other guy who did houses like on Deschler and City Park and so forth, the more expensive houses.
Well,
And
these
we
houses
weren't
were
getting
going
them.
in the like $2,000.
Right.
You said that so
Right.
there was an opportunity to really make some money.
Right.
If you could fix it up.
Right, and you had to put a lot of money in it to fix it up. But then there was room. This guy who I can't think of, was doing the same thing and would turn around because his houses were around the park in that area, sell them for $150,000. I watched property behind me a block away go from 200,000 to additional restorations over their year with new owners. Somebody putting in a swimming pool. The last couple times they changed hands was $1.5 million, that kind of thing that went on.
You must have seen when you started investing money here and living here how this was all. You must have had some vision as to what this was going to look like going forward to make that your primary profitable venture. What was it that you saw that made you feel good about German Village as an investment opportunity?
Well, number one, my connection with the old South Side. There were neighbors and people in the area who went to school with me, so there was that kind of connection. Just because we were in the restoring rehab of houses in the non-German Village area made us quote experts on what could be done and what couldn't be done. And we were limited in capital. We could only do so many at a time. And doing the ones in German Village gave us the opportunity to buy properties that did have some good long-term future for either to keep them or for resale.
Well,
We just sold the 8-family on Whittier a year and a half ago. When we bought that again, that was a $40 a month rental, and they were mostly elderly people. And we made it a point to ourselves, we are not going to force anybody to move out of that building so we can restore it. They're all elderly. That's a very disruptive thing to people's life. So as they graduated to nursing homes or they passed away, we restored one unit in the 8-family unit at a time, just going down the row and doing the inside, and sold the building restored for something like $440,000.
And I guess you said Frank Fitch was a pretty wily competitor too of yours.
In the early days, yes.
Um, Well, you know, one thing I find interesting, you've been in the business of real estate, but you also were a regulator as somebody on the commission and then
Right.
chair. Looking at it from both perspectives, do you see a real purpose in regulating how it's having the commission, that it's been a good thing for the
Yes,
village?
I think it's been a terrific thing.
You know, why is that?
Because if you're going, it's not that you're buying a $2,000 house, it's you're putting in money, and when it's done, you're going to have a $125,000 house, and you don't want to put your money in unless you think that the neighborhood around it is going to continue to go up. And we saw that here and there, private individuals would buy a house and fix it up for their own use. And we thought that gave us a good, stable base. And the commission also gave us the stable base of knowing that when somebody buys a property and they want to fix it up, they're going to have to meet that minimum standard
So it helps the value of all the
of
properties to have
everybody.
some regulation.
Right, right.
Well, here you are, 83 years old, you're still working. What are you doing these days?
That's true. Well, I'm trying to, at this point, trying to settle some large-scale subsidized housing complexes that we did 25, 30 years ago. And I'm going through, which takes more paper, almost as much paperwork as it did the first time around.
Sure.
And that's about it. Oh, incidentally, once in a while I make a real estate sale. Handled the brokerage of the Seneca Hotel to a high school, to a fraternity brother from New Jersey, who, or Philadelphia, was getting into the college housing area, came to Columbus, called me, we had lunch together, and he told me some other multifamily commercial built company that he's working with, and I don't even remember who it was. And I told him, frankly, at that point, I no longer had friends who owned these old warehouse buildings. They had all either passed away or moved away, and the woman she had, he had experience and was with the firm, was doing a lot of commercial around downtown. Go with them. And he said, fine. He had gone with the Casto organization for 2 years, and they never came up with a single building that he could use. And he was sort of frustrated on that. And I said, you come in from the airport on Broad Street, coming downtown. Have you ever seen the Seneca Hotel? He said, yeah, I drive by it every time, and here's this big empty building. I said, would you be interested in that? He said, definitely. I said, well, if it can be bought right. And I said, well, I went to high school with the guy who owns it,
Bob Szymanski?
Bob Szymanski. I know that he was very angry at the Casto organization because they fluffed him around for 2 years and never came up with anything. Let me see whether or not it's still listed. I can't work on it if it's listed with another company. He said, no, I canceled them a couple months ago. I said, well, I've got this young man from Philadelphia who's done a lot of warehouse to collegiate housing stuff, has got good money behind him. Let's see if we can put something together. And we did. Sold the...
Well, that's a big deal.
That's another.
That furthered the preservation of Columbus, not just Urban Village, but that's a wonderful old building, and now it's safe for more generations.
Right, and it was a little over $1 million brokerage sale for me. So, and then the final one that I've been involved in, we had a subsidized housing complex in Urban Crest, which is down near
Right.
Grove City, of I think 215 units. and the limited partners decided that they wanted out. So we arranged a sale of that property to Columbus Housing Partnership. And that was, as I say, 200 and some units. And I forget what the commission was, but it was a nice drop back into the market and make some money.
Let me just ask, that's a great achievement, and something that I'm glad you brought up because we didn't talk about that earlier. But as it relates to German Village, let me just close with this
Sure.
question. Tell me what you're most proud of in your relationship with German Village and what you've been involved with.
Don't know that I can take it and roll it down to one. When I have friends from out of town come in, I drive them around and show them how terrific German village is. And sometimes I'll say, see that 4-family over there, we restored and sold that one. And that's my old home at 745 South Fifth Street, so forth. I'm just pleased with the way the whole area developed, even though I'm not doing any development in German Village anymore.
Well, you had a big part in it,
I
and
did-
we want to thank you so much for your time today. And
Okay.
this is a great interview. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
sure.